Want and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church, how it was laid out, how everything worked. The issues they had, especially with us being in First Corinthians, looking at a lot of the issues that they had. And so, just appreciate all those who've been following along. And as always, I highly recommend if those who haven't, just to subscribe to our channel, because we're doing this as a daily Bible study. It's a chronological daily Bible study, and that way you get the notifications alert when we publish every morning. But again, like I always said, I really appreciate those who have followed along so far. So today we're in 1 Corinthians 16. Paul is wrapping up his letter to the 1 Corinthians. This is a short little section, 1 through 4, and we're looking at the collection for Jerusalem. So Paul talks about the collection for the church in Jerusalem. So we'll go through this real quick. It says, now regarding your question about the money being collected for God's people in Jerusalem, you should follow the same procedure I gave to the church in Galatia. On the first day of each week, you should each put aside a portion of the money you have earned. Don't wait until I get there and then try to collect it all at once. When I come, I will write letters of recommendations for the messengers you choose to deliver your gift to Jerusalem. And if it seems appropriate for me to go along, they can travel with me. And so, again, like I said, this is a short little section that he just kind of hits on this. And so when he says it, when we see this several times in his transition, he'll say now concerning, right? And that's a transition from one subject to another. Usually, talking about the things that they had wrote about him in the letter to him, but sometimes it would be about things that he had heard or people had mentioned to him. So this is another issue. And so this is Paul's collection of money for needy Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. And we'll see this in Acts 24. We'll see it in Romans 15, and we'll see him talk about it in 2 Corinthians as well. And so we'll hit this a little bit later on. But Paul, he brought relief aid to the church in Judea. He did this more than once. We have seen it in looking at Acts 11 and Galatians as well. And so, this is just something that they did. The church helped take care of the other churches, and other Christians. And this is this is part of our responsibility of what we should be doing. And so he told them to do this on the first day of the week. And this is a Jewish expression for Sundays. And similar to the phrase used in the Gospels to describe the day of the week in which Jesus rose from the dead. So you can see that in Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24, and John 20. And so this showed that the Christians gathered for worship on Sunday and not Saturday, in order to acknowledge the crucial importance of Christ's resurrection. And that was part of the reason why there was a shift into the Sunday type of worship and all that. Now, there's nothing that commands that we have to worship. Your worship has to be on Sunday. That's just been the tradition that's been passed down to us. We don't see any thing here. Some people would say this was a command. I know Paul. This is a command to take to take an offering or to collect this money on the first day of the week, but it's not that we have to. But the reason he says on the first day of the week is because that's when they met. And so again, I want to get into this just a little bit, because there's some people who believe like you have to worship on Sunday, and that's what the Bible commands, and if you don't, then you're doing something wrong. I don't believe that. I don't see that in the scripture anywhere. I see that that's just what they did. They did that to honor the day that Jesus rose from the dead. We still do that to this day because that's been passed down through tradition. But I know people who part of their worship service is on Saturday, and they meet on Saturdays for worship. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so the idea here is just look, when you come together, collect a portion of what you've earned that week on the first day of the week. So that way, whenever I come back, you're not scrambling to try to find a bunch of money or find money for these people, and then we're not able to help them or support them the way we should. And so he then tells them, he says, set aside a portion of the money you have earned, and it's not specified. The amount that he says gives them is not specified, and we know Paul later encourages them to give generously. We're going to see that in 2 Corinthians. Luke wrote about that, and Paul's going to write about that in 1 Timothy when he writes to Timothy about, hey, do this, give generously. And so around giving, and I've talked about this I think a little bit. I don't like talking about giving a whole lot sometimes, just because the church has got a negative there's a negative view of the church sometimes. It seems, a lot of people are like, well, they're just always asking for money, always asking for money. And I don't want to appear that way, definitely. but we are to give. That's one of the things we are to give. And there's some people who say, well, you have to give, you have to tithe, you have to give 10%. Well, we don't see that anywhere in the New Testament. I don't think that's a bad thing to go by. I always say that's a good starting point. I think, because, we're told to give as we've been blessed, and to give generously, and things like that. So I think, going from an Old Testament standard, I think that, 10% is a good starting point, but I also think there's a lot more to giving than just money. And we'll talk about this more when we get into some Paul's writings on giving and stuff like that. But I just want people to understand that, there's no command in the New Testament that we have to give 10% of everything, or anything like that. But like I said, I do think that's a good starting point. But I think more than anything, the giving, when it comes to giving, what it matters is the condition of the heart when you give. And so we'll talk about that more. But anyways, Paul would then later send this money with several representatives chosen by the Corinthian church, the Corinthian church, and showing that he took care to prevent any appearance of misuse of funds. And so we see that in this last little bit here. If you look at it, it says, when I come, I'll write letters of recommendations for the messengers you choose to deliver your gifts. And if it seems appropriate for me to go along, then they can travel with me. He's saying, look, if anyone has a problem with me traveling with them to deliver this money, then I won't go, because I don't want to do anything that seems like it's off, seems like I'm misrepresenting or doing something with these funds that I shouldn't be. Paul was very careful to not do anything that was going to show the appearances of him, a misusing of funds, misusing of his authority as an apostle. He was very careful in that, and he's talked about that all in this letter. And so I just think that's important, something that we should do. Be careful, very careful, extra careful, not to look like we're doing something we shouldn't be with the funds that the church gives. And be appropriate with them and all that. And so, again, like I said, this isn't a very long. The last note there is Paul. We do know that Paul did, in fact, deliver the gift to Jerusalem. We're going to see that when we get into Romans. It's like around Romans 15, I believe, where he talks about that. And so, again, just a simple thing on how we should give and why we should collect every Sunday. And that, well, basically the main idea here, the main reason for giving on Sundays and collecting money for the church to help people on Sundays is so that whenever there is a need, we can take care of it, right? And we're not having to and we do this, and I've talked about this. Like we don't, I don't take a salary. I don't, all this stuff. We try to do everything we can that with, we want the largest percentage of the funds that we take in to go towards helping people. And so it's a good idea that, if we collect every Sunday or on a regular basis, our opportunity now with the way technology is you can all give anytime. And so it doesn't have to be just on Sundays. But our idea is we give regularly. So that way, whenever our need does arise, we're not having to scramble and say, hey, we need people to give to do this, to this, to this. And we have the funds available to help people that are needed. And I think that's the main principle that Paul's getting at around here with this. And so, anyways, I hope y'all are learning from it. I hope y'all appreciate these, and like I said, I get something out of them every single time we go. And then we'll finish up. We're getting to the end of this letter. Like I said, this is the last chapter in this letter, and Paul's wrapping up this letter. And so we'll continue this next week and finish it, and then we'll get into Acts a little bit, and then into 2 Corinthians and start that letter. As always, appreciate everyone for watching. I hope y'all have a wonderful day.